Do you want this? Oh, you got one.
I'm gonna go upstairs.
What time's your class?
5:30.
I'll go
I'm just
upstairs.
open up for this
Okay.
together.
Okay, do you need, is this proprietary or? It's
No.
Yeah.
Okay, I might just work. I may see you, well, actually, I'll come upstairs and then I'll come back.
No worries.
Is there a conference room there or not?
I don't know.
Okay, bye guys.
See you later.
So nice meeting you.
Yeah, you too.
I love our conversation.
How did SBI work?
Hey, everybody.
Hello.
You're muted, Christina.
Can you hear me now?
Try again.
Can you hear me now?
I can't through these headphones. Abu, can you hear Christina? Say something, Christina?
Hello? Hello, hello?
I think so. I don't know if it's because you're sitting right next to me or because these headphones are all messed up.
Yeah, those headphones might be messed up.
Wait, let me try playing something else. No. Can you hear that?
Mhm.
Oh. I don't know why Zoom audio isn't working.
Zoom's audio never works.
Okay. Okay. Well, I can hear you. Christina, do you have the journal article?
Yes. Should I share it?
Please.
There we go. Okay. Do we have everyone? Or should we wait a couple minutes?
Maybe 2 more minutes. Let me switch headphones.
Just like in my junk boxes, so I don't know if
No worries.
Hello.
Oh, okay, that's better. Hi, Abu.
Hi, Max.
How are you?
Good. I'm excited.
Yeah, this is right up your alley.
Yeah. Did you pick this?
I
No.
picked it.
Oh, thank you. I really enjoyed the research.
Right, I thought it was super cool.
How did you come across it?
I was Googling, sorry, I'm getting feedback of myself. Hold on, I'm gonna go to the,
Sure.
let me see if that can but I was Googling to try and find articles about children and virtual reality,
Mm-hmm.
because I feel like I spend so much time working in fields of virtual reality for pediatrics and for hospitals, children's hospitals, and one of the questions that I get a lot is what age is appropriate to start using virtual reality. I'm still here myself.
Hey, Abu, are you having trouble hearing her?
A little bit, yeah.
Do you want to try messing with your earbuds? It seems like there's a lot of feedback.
Yeah.
I see that you're in the academy. Recognize the monitors.
We have officially moved in.
Okay, let's try this.
Sounds better.
Okay. Is that working?
Yeah, sounds good.
Perfect. That's much better. I'm not getting the feedback anymore. So I was saying I get questions a lot from like parents and other adult figures about what age is appropriate to start putting kids in virtual reality.
Right, yeah.
And as someone that comes out of Mari and Tina's program, it's sort of like, well, we just don't know enough about children in virtual reality to really be able to say what those safety guidelines should be.
Mhm.
And so I was curious to see if there had been research done that sort of establishes a framework for understanding when virtual reality is appropriate for kids, sort of what those markers are, what the concerns are. And there isn't a ton of data out there, which I was surprised by, because usually you at least hear people say things like, oh, well, we're worried about how it will impact children's developing vision, and will they develop nearsightedness because the screen is right in front of your face, or
Mhm.
will it cause eye strain, or will it cause neck strain? But there aren't a ton of people who think about, like, well, how is it impacting sort of children's neurological development and their mental health? And that, to me, seems like a way bigger problem.
Mhm.
If you have eye strain, you can take off the headset. Or if you develop nearsightedness, you can wear glasses. But if it's causing some sort of long-lasting neurological or psychological changes, then we should know that now and be able to sort of prepare for it. And so I thought that this article was really interesting because it really delves into that question of, well, how much can children distinguish between reality and virtual reality, and how much of that are they sort of embodying as part of their own narrative and their own personal story.
Totally. Mhm.
And I think it's really telling that this article is from 2009, and it was the most recent
Mm.
one on this topic that I could find. Because, you think about what type of technology they must have been using in 2009, and then you think about what we have
Mhm.
accessible to us that we like carry around in our pockets. And the stats like,
Very interesting.
oh, do they?
I believe it's on research.
Oh,
Well, it's
yeah,
not
there we go.
really huge. Because, I mean, I feel like VR headsets hasn't changed much since the 90s. They're just a little lighter, a little better, but the technology is still like pretty much the same. But the graphics, though, like that B screen on there is, I feel like if we were to redo the study now, it would probably be a lot more realistic.
Right. And so I think for me, that's a big question that this article brought up is it sort of better to have, if you're going to have a children in virtual reality, is it better to have them in a like realistic environment or a stylized one?
Better in terms of like mental health?
Yeah.
Okay.
Like, is it easier to distinguish between reality and virtual reality if you're in a hyper stylized environment? Or on the other hand, is it sort of easier for a child's brain to distinguish between, you know, this looks real but isn't.
Right.
Or maybe, I guess, is that less harmful if it looks real but isn't versus a complete fantasy environment, if that makes sense. And then I think there are a lot of questions too about like duration of time that you spend in a virtual environment, and how much that impacts the amount that you, I guess, internalize what you've been seeing in virtual reality.
Yeah. I remember seeing a video that kind of documented this guy. I believe he's maybe 35 years old. He spent a whole week in VR, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And he did not come out of the headset. And in the end, I don't think he got any physical like disorder. Yeah. Oh, I did not know he did a TED Talk too. That was cool. I will look into that. But I believe he talked about a lot of the mental kind of strain that it had on him, and how, like, in the end, he was super glad to be like back in the real world, because I feel like it doesn't matter how realistic you build a virtual environment, it's never going to have that same sensory feedback that you get when you're just like in the moment.
I mean, I think that's true and it isn't. I imagine that when we get better like haptic feedback, and when the graphics get better, it'll be way harder to distinguish. But also what I think has been so interesting for me is that I've been in virtual environments before where I've completely forgotten that the things around me aren't real. And so I've tried to like lean on a counter or sit down in a chair and just like wiped out because it's virtual. And you know, I'm an adult who spends like a decent amount of time in virtual environments, and my brain still can't really reliably distinguish between those things when I'm not thinking about it. And so thinking about children, like, you know, if my adult brain can't do it, their developing child brains must have such a more difficult time with that same.
Yeah, I can see that. And I think what this research did really well was providing the background on kind of all the other forms of media that they've used to kind of alter people's memories. I really enjoyed going through like that background and seeing how, you know, like 2D media is still a very powerful mechanism to influence what these children are receiving as their memories.
In addition to just storytelling, that was really interesting too. What I thought was really novel was this idea of the media richness.
Yeah.
And having a quantification value of like the level of immersion. I think that was a really nice touch.
Definitely. Yeah. But I don't know if I agree with the point that, you know, the higher the media richness, the more, it's not the more realistic, because they're saying that, you know, VR has a very high media richness, but because it is digital, it's not the same as if we're remembering it in real life. I feel like there's still a distinction to be made in terms of the different mediums that you're in.
Well, if I remember correctly, and I took some notes, that media richness did not affect false memory scores in preschool children. but they did affect it in elementary school children. So what I am interested in also is what's going on in that in the brain of during that transition of preschool to elementary school. Is there some sort of like critical period of deciphering, narrative structures versus imagery versus like VR? Is there something going on in the child brain that influences memory formation or like embodiment?
I would imagine that it's when you're a preschooler, when you're like really little, all information is kind of the same. So, the things that you're taking in on Sesame Street, or the things that you're taking in when your parents read you a book, or the things that you're experiencing in real life are all providing the same amount of data about the world to you. Whereas when you get a little bit older, you start being able to distinguish between, this is a thing that's for fun, but isn't real. And this is a thing that's real and has like real world consequences and real world information. And you're still not super good at distinguishing them, but you get a little bit better at pruning the information that you don't need out, I guess. Sort of like we were talking about in Mariantina's class the other day, Max.
Yeah. Another thing, similarly, and one thing that you mentioned, Awu, was that narrative created more false memories than pictures, which is interesting. And I know that like in some like security guards jobs, they're able to like sit and watch movies, but they're completely discouraged to read books because you're more inclined to like fall into a book and not like go do your job. But like a movie, you can just put down and like move on. That was really interesting.
I believe they talk about like the mental effort that you need to put into when you're trying to like imagine the scenario, right? And the more effort that you have to put into, the more likely you're gonna remember this thing, because you're actively reconstructing this narrative, at least just telling yourself internally. And that process is what actually creates the foundation of this memory.
I would be interested too in if they were going to do another study, if narrative-based virtual reality experiences are more likely to be remembered as false memories than sort of experiential VR. So something like Wolves in the Walls versus like Beat Saber. Because it feels sort of intuitively like the story makes a real difference, and like sort of that more than the richness of the media itself is impacting or I guess these children's recall. And so I can only imagine once you get the combination of like super immersive environments and then super constructed and emotionally resonant narratives, how much that will change the dynamic here as well.
Yeah. Well, speaking of Wolves in the Walls, I actually just tried it out yesterday.
Did you? What did you think of it?
I heard a lot about it, and I actually know a few of the team members who have built it.
Really?
I don't know if you know Marion, but she used to be this. She's in the animation program, and she worked on it over the summer and was very excited about like this second iteration that they're doing for this character. So I really loved how you're able to connect with Lucy in the experience, right? It was like she did everything kind of with you in mind. Like she looks at you, she tries to interact with you. She even like, I feel like my favorite memory of the experience is the drawing the hand. When she like when you have to reach out and then she kind of builds you pretty much. That really made me connect with this character and connect with her. And even though I'm kind of a third person observer to all the story that's happening around you, the fact that she kind of acknowledges me made me feel like I'm a part of that story. So yeah, I think they did that really well.
Yeah, to me, that's the most incredible part of that experience. I mean, it's a really incredible narrative. It's really well done from a graphic standpoint. The animation is beautiful, but I think what really sets it apart is that connection that you build with this character and the empathy that you have for her. And I think that that has just endless implications for what else you can do with virtual reality in terms of empathy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I really love some of the techniques they use to entice immersion. Like the very first action you have in the game is picking up the flashlight. It's like welcoming you to engage. And then one of the most brilliant things I thought was when you get the glass and put it up to your ear.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, oh my God, that's brilliant. And another thing that I kept thinking about is when you transition into the game, like the old school Atari game,
Yeah.
like, you know, like an experience within an experience. It was just like, oh man, that is so awesome. That's so well done. Yeah, we keep showing it off to people here at IYA, and it's so much fun watching them explore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel
It does a really good job. Oh, sorry, Awu, I interrupted you.
I was just gonna say like the part when you put on the virtual headset inside the virtual experience is what kind of confuses, I feel like, most people. And when you come out of it, you're kind of lost, like which level am I in, right? So once we get to that level, it's really hard to distinguish, you know, what is real versus what is not. Yeah.
Inception.
Mm-hmm.
That actually, as a narrative, I bet would lend itself really interestingly to virtual reality.
Mm-hmm.
But what I was going to say is I think it also, Wolves in the Walls does a really great job of playing with levels, because a lot of virtual reality sort of lets you interact with like this, but
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't try to get you to reach up. It doesn't try to get you to kneel down. It just sort of lets you interact with what's in your field of vision already. But with Wolves in the Wall, you like kneel down, you reach up, you know, sit
Mm-hmm.
sometimes, and like it really pushes you to explore the entire environment, which I think is super interesting.
Yeah. And maybe that is another factor that I feel like these studies should consider is the, you know, interactiveness. I mean, they talk about kind of like non-linear narratives, but I don't think they've talked much about how your user agency in the memory itself can influence like the way you process the experience. And I feel like that is, yeah, an affordance that VR has.
Yeah, and intuitively, it seems like it would make sense that if you actually experience doing the thing, especially in first person, you would remember it a lot more as if it's your own real lived experience than you would if you're sort of watching a 360 video unfold in front of you in virtual reality.
Yeah.
Well, they did have two conditions for the VR group, right? There's the VR where your face was like, their face was photoshopped in, and then they had it from the first person perspective. So they did kind of start to dig into that type of interaction, how the level of interaction influenced. And I believe, yeah, if you see it there, VR other versus VR self, or maybe you're looking at another character. I don't remember. I think they're starting to dig into that, which is like really exciting.
Yeah, the third person versus first person.
One thing that I really wanted to, I think, is a possible confound here was they asked the children to recall, but they didn't provide or even elucidate if there was a script of available prompts to prompt that recall. I think it's there's a lot of research on interrogations, on trials, how the power of suggestion can get people to, or even like imagine a research setting where a young child is being interviewed by a clinician, or like a seemingly like being an interviewer is a very powerful condition for a kid. Like what elements of that power dynamic could influence that recall? So if you're asking leading questions, if they're asking like different prompts of different kids, then it could possibly alter their recall, I think. Yeah. So I would be really interested to see if there was like a set script that they could only use as prompts.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think they mentioned in the introduction, maybe, the Elizabeth Loftus studies, Lost in a Mall, where basically you would get researchers to ask kids about the time that they were lost in a mall as a child. Kids, they might have been adults, I don't remember. But just suggesting that there was this event that happened to them where they got lost in a mall as a child increased the likelihood that the person would remember getting lost in a mall, even if it wasn't a thing that happened to them at all. And so I think that's a really good point. The way that you present the question, the way that you sort of construct the experiment does have a real impact on the way that the response is produced, I guess, and what you remember.
Yeah.
I would also be really interested to see if, since this was done a little while ago, what about like if you could create more personal, customizable experiences? Like, what if we made like a deep fake study where like your face was put on a person and you were played back like a memory, and then you were like in a hyper realistic fashion, you were asked if this event actually occurred or not.
Weird.
Like over a longitudinal study. I think that could be pretty nuts.
Yeah, that's super interesting. Man.
And then one side note that I thought was like really, really interesting was the kids that recalled an event with extra detail. So it's like, oh, did you actually do this? They're like, yeah. And then the mouse took me on to Disneyland, and then we went to the park and we played basketball and all this stuff. I wonder what it is about like that personality trait, or if those people have like a specific, something about them that that encourages that type of like imaginative interaction.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I would wonder too, sort of going back to the deep fake thing, if the similarity of the character you're playing as to you, physically or, emotionally or whatever, impacts if you remember the thing as happening to you or not. I know we were talking earlier, Max and I, about the Slater studies where they would have people embody bodies that are unlike their own. And I wonder if you sort of see that the opposite is true if you embody a body like yourself. what the implications of that are.
What do you mean?
Well, I can imagine that if the body you're in virtual reality looks more like you, you're more likely to internalize that body as like you doing things versus a separation between you and the virtual character. And it's clear that no matter what the body looks like, you're still sort of internalizing it to an extent. Because when you get out of virtual reality, you have much more empathy for whatever that virtual body that you had looked like. But I wonder if that effect is more prominent when your virtual avatar looks like you, I guess. Does that make sense?
I think
Yeah.
so. Yeah. Here's an interesting thing that I've kind of picked up on when like asking first time VR users if the VR experience reminds them of something. And a lot of the times people will say it feels like a dream. And I think it's interesting because you know, when we come out of the dream, we are usually trying to recall like specific things that happened in the dream and trying to make a narrative out of that dream so that we can better remember it and tell it to someone. And that's very similar to like when people come out of the headset, because there's kind of this like a moment of disconnect when you take off the headset and now you're like, oh, I'm awake and I'm actually here, right? And now you're trying to recall whatever that has kind of happened in the past 5 minutes or so. So I think it's interesting to find the parallels in between the two experiences and how that affects the way we remember the experience. And
That's interesting too, because I think the moment where you take the headset off is very much like the disorientation you get when you wake up from being in the middle of a dream. Because oftentimes, especially if it's like walking VR, you've ended up in like a random place in the room,
right.
and where you like think that you are isn't actually where you are, and so you take the headset off, and it takes you a second to sort of orient yourself in the physical space again and say, oh, I ended up in like the back right corner of the room or whatever. I think that's very similar to when you wake up and you were in a very vivid dream and you're sort of looking around and trying to get your bearings again. And I mean, I wonder too how much we can learn sort of about dreams from virtual reality and vice versa.
Yeah.
I don't even know what you do with that, but that's like that connection is really interesting to me.
Yeah. Another thing that's very unique to dreams is that it's very kind of disjointed, right? Like in the dream sequence, you can go from like super realistic experiences to like very weird and abstract experiences. And I feel like that's also true for VR. Like it can change like the style, change whatever experience that you're in, like very quickly. And that kind of makes it harder for us to remember the whole thing as one experience, right? Like usually like dreams have like very, very different parts. So we have to spend so much more effort trying to piece all the puzzles together. And maybe that is what kind of strengthens this memory, what makes it more real and more memorable. It's because of that.
Yeah, that's interesting too. I wonder if from a neurological perspective, and Max, you might know the answer to this, but if it's easier to remember one like continuous narrative, or if it's easier to remember things that are very different and sort of chunked.
Yeah, there's such thing as memory chunking And for example, in working memory, for like digits, they say that you theoretically most people can only remember 6 or 7 digits. There's things such as semantic memory versus episodic memory. So essentially, depending on the context that you're learning or behaving in something, the more likely you are to remember. There's a cool exercise called the memory palace, where you have a set list of objects and you place them in you visualize them in space. And in general, that helps to increase recall in those different items.
Right.
So yeah, these are all like really cool ideas that we totally can try to recreate in VR. And then there's also like literature and studies that we can like use their same quantitative analysis to see if there's any difference between mechanisms, like mediums of stimulating the person. So I think there's a lot of room for that.
Do you think creating memory palaces in virtual reality would, like physical memory palaces in virtual reality, would help people to learn better? Like,
Well,
that's really interesting to me.
Yeah, that's one of the key words you said there was learning, right? One thing, an interesting idea is recall of working memory necessarily learning, or is it just recalling a set of an array of ideas or objects? But yeah, I think what I would really like to see is like if you were to visualize, let's say there's a list of objects, if you had the capability of placing those objects in real life settings of yourself, like if you were to do it in the Ivan and Young lab, if you were to do it in your bedroom, as opposed to like just like random cityscapes, if there'd be any difference to that. So kind of playing with not only the idea of the memory palace, but like applicable, some like contextual items in places that are important to your life. That'd be a cool exercise.
Huh. Man, there's so much you can do with virtual reality.
Oh, by the way, I found the author, and I reached out to her on LinkedIn like yesterday. So I was if I had reached out to her earlier and she got back to me, I was gonna invite her to this, because I think that'd be really cool to get her feedback, especially
That's
like
super cool.
but I think that in the future, if we get enough, like if we get the article selected, we should just invite people. Like the worst that they can do is say no, right? So yeah, something to keep in mind for future journal articles.
I love that idea.
She teaches at the Stanford Design School now.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, and the D School is like really famous for stuff that we're working on, the VR MRI. David Kelly was one of the main founders of the Stanford D School, and he was the one that changed the game for MRI. So it's cool that the articles that we're selecting now are very much applicable to academia and the way things are being taught.
Super cool. I wonder if we can get Mel Slater on a call sometime.
That would be awesome. He's pretty famous, so that would be cool. We should definitely try to get more than 3 people if he does come by.
I feel like he's the foundation of like everything I have been taught in this field. So that would be super cool.
By the way, I wanted to get your guys' consent to put this recording up on YouTube so we can have them forever and people can watch them, if that's okay with you.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I saw the recording icon and was like, am I recording or?
I'm recording.
I'm glad we did this memory.
Cool.
Yeah, I like that idea. Because I think it would be super cool if eventually people started watching them and then we could fold those people into the conversations.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's an interesting way of growing this community outside of the people that we know physically, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I guess on the topic of kind of archiving memories, I want to kind of explore or talk about like tags and indexes that we have when we're storing these memories, and whether it's going to be different regarding which medium the memory is coming from, right? So if we're like reading a book versus in VR, does that affect the way we store the memory? And what are these tags? In the in this study, they talk a little bit about how these memories are really stored with tags that identify the sources, and they didn't get too much into how we actually, like store these memories. So I was wondering if you Max have some thoughts on that.
Well, I think when you first mentioned that, I think one metric that they they measured that is important to decipher something like that is that media richness metric, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think there has to be some way of quantifying not only is a book versus a film, how does that entice memory formation, but like the level of engagement with each of those individual pieces. Um, because like not all books are created equal, right? Not all films are created equal.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so there's that. And then, there's been a lot of research in rodent models where they have like electrical, deep electrical stimulation. And they've mapped out, for example, like a rodent as it walks through mazes and kind of decoding memories from neural inputs and outputs.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously that's something that we can't do in humans. Um, but yeah, memory formation, that's a really good question. I'd have to read up more on that.
Mm-hmm. Got it. Yeah, I'm really curious because I'm trying to figure out how to get people more kind of inclined to relive or revisit their memories. I'm very disappointed by what kind of Facebook is doing with their reminders, right? Like 4 years ago, I feel like there is a much better way to reactivate and re-trigger these memories, and that's something I'm super interested in right now.
That's really interesting to me too, from the perspective of people who are losing their memories. Like,
Mm-hmm.
what can you do? And I mean, this goes like straight back to um, all of the work that the gerontology school is doing. But like, what can you do to trigger memories in people who are losing them? I mean, we know that music, for example, is a really powerful trigger for people with dementia or Alzheimer's.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so, you can imagine that in a virtual environment where you can create very realistic renderings of what a person's past might have been like, and especially now as we're getting so much data all the time about what our lives look like, reconstructing those environments and then putting someone in them, I would be super curious to see what the outcome of that is.
Yeah.
Yeah, I actually take a 360 camera with me pretty much all the time, and I capture moments fairly frequently, just because yeah, like what's the memory? What is my memory book? What is my photo album going to look like when I'm older? And there's got to be a way where like translating a 360 video to a room scale experience, so I can like go back to my wedding day. I could go back to my house the way it looked like in 2020. I think that's a really interesting um, experiment that we'll see how it works in a number of years.
I love that idea so much. That's so crazy.
I could be capturing this moment right now.
You are. You're recording it.
I want to start doing that.
Yeah. Yeah, I use an Insta 360. I think it was like $150 or something. I bought it like 2 years ago.
That's it.
That's it.
I'm going to start doing that. Because I love, well, mostly, I love when like Google Photos sends me an update that's like, this is where you were 3 years ago today. And I'm always like, oh, like it's so sweet. Facebook, maybe not so much.
Yeah. I wonder why. Why do we prefer Google Photos?
Well, I think the difference is, well, the difference is a couple of things. I think Facebook has way more data on me than I care to think about, and for way more years than like Google Photos does.
Mm-hmm.
So it can be like, remember the terrible person you were when you were like 13? Like, I would prefer not to, thank you. Whereas for the most part, I think the things that Google Photos has are like memories that I chose to document and would like to continue remembering.
Yeah.
Because I think Facebook also includes like stuff that other people sent to you or posted on your wall or whatever. And I think that's a really mixed bag.
Mm-hmm.
Because like sometimes it's really nice, like, oh, remember that time you sent me this and like it was cute. And sometimes it's like, oh, I don't talk to that person anymore because they're terrible.
Mm-hmm.
And like, I don't want to be reminded of the fact that, I don't know, whatever, lost a significant relationship.
Mm-hmm.
Facebook, I guess, has more data to manipulate. And I think that comes with good things, and it also comes with like really bad things.
Yeah, they don't really have the context that we have, right?
Yeah.
All they can do is guess or like assume that it's something that we might be interested in and take a shot at it. Yeah, that's really interesting.
Cool. Did you guys want to add anything else about the article?
Sorry, kind of split off and
Yeah, that's okay. I mean, I think that's great. I love it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the conversation that came out of this article was pretty much what I was hoping would happen.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I wish that more people had come. I hope that we can find a time eventually that is accessible for everyone.
Yeah, we were doing noon on every other Wednesday, and it's kind of, we had like four or five people the second time, which was pretty good, and I think maybe even more. But yeah, we got to figure this out. But I'm glad we're doing it.
Yeah, me too.
Thank you for keeping it alive. This is very, very valuable to me. And I tried to get my team to come too, but I posted a link, but not sure if people could make it or not. But I'll definitely share with them the video and kind of what we talked about. This is very, very prevalent to what we're working on right now.
Cool.
Yeah, please, and thank you for sharing. That's great. So the next one that we're going to do is on February 19th, 2020. For perpetuity's sake, just clarify the year. I don't know if you want to do that, Awu, or if I'm next in line. So I'd be happy to pick that up too.
Sure, I will give it a shot. Yeah,
Awesome.
I just send you the research doc once I kind of come across one that I think is interesting.
Yeah, it can be on any topic. It doesn't matter. It doesn't even necessarily have to be on XR although, yeah, it's your discretion. But if you could send me that by the 16th or 17th, then I'll send it out to all the people and then we can get going. And I'll be sure to put a reminder to remind you in the calendar.
Thank you.
Cool.
Cool.
Forward to the next one.
Thanks very much, Christina, for picking the article and for, organizing and everything.
Of course.
Right.
Okay.
Then
Bye, everybody.
Bye.